Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I interview founders, entrepreneurs, executives, thought leaders, artists, you name it, all over the world of crypto and blockchain. And today I have another amazing guest. She is the CGO at Shardeum. Her name is Kelsey McGuire. Kelsey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You're very welcome. So the way I like to kick things off is I ask you first, what is your background and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
I'll get into my background, and I think it is loosely logical, although not a direct linear path into what I do now. A lot of my background before I got into Web3 was more in the fashion and beauty industry, where I focused on marketing, branding, strategic partnership, and experiential stuff, everything from engaging campaigns and different types of arrangements in shops and bigger corporate brands to artist collaborations for a nail polish company. So I think in that way, it really helped me view things from a very holistic perspective when it comes to marketing and branding, comms, and creative for tech. But that really kind of got me into a little bit more of the consulting side. So I was working with some smaller tech startups when I guess this was now in 2017. I did a little bit of that, but I was really interested in getting into something full-time in tech. And I'd heard a little bit about blockchain and Web3 because a lot of my friends who worked in finance in New York City, where I'm based, were starting to get a little nervous about it. And anything that they're nervous about is kind of intriguing to me. So I got into it a little bit more and ended up meeting someone that worked at Consensys in, I think, late 2017, learned a little bit more about the company, went through the multiple rounds of interviews, and started working there in early 2018. That was an amazing experience and a great start to my Web3 career, just because, especially at that time, you have Consensys overall as this big entity in the Web3 space, focused, of course, on Ethereum, and these amazing projects that they were working with, like Truffle developer tools, Gitcoin, MetaMask. It just was pretty incredible to be able to connect with some of those founders as well and work on projects across the board, mostly focused on community strategy. After that, I ended up going over to Celo, which was an L1 at the time, is now an L2. Worked a lot on kind of partnerships there. So it all does kind of, run together in terms of themes with this type of work, but each one definitely had some unique challenges. And then I joined CoinFund as their CMO and was there for a number of years as well. And that was another great role where I got to sort of take care of and oversee this larger brand presence, which was CoinFund itself, and then work with some of our portfolio company founders and, really explore both the RIA, registered investment advisor side, as well as that kind of deep tech side. But I missed sort of being more in it and joined Shardeum, I guess, just a little over a year ago now as their CGO. So similar types of activities as what I've been discussing, but everything from creative direction to overseeing some of our PR efforts to public speaking and, having the opportunity to be on podcasts like this is all in my purview now.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I've interviewed people from Consensys and I think I interviewed somebody from Celo a few years ago. So yeah, very cool.
Right, you're familiar.
This Shardium,
Yeah,
right? What is that? What is Shardium all about, including your vision and your mission and your focus?
absolutely. So Shardeum is an EVM-based auto-scaling layer one. So just like some of the other projects I worked with in the past, Consensys was focused on Ethereum and L1. Celo was an L1 at that time. And even some of the projects I've worked with through CoinFund, I believe, were L1s as well. This is that foundation layer technology, which gives me a lot of opportunity to kind of tap into the project itself as well as the broader ecosystem. And Shardium's really focused on onboarding, of course, that next few million to, a billion people to Web3. And it's really focused on community, staying open, collaborative, and community driven, and really kind of taking that idea of decentralization, not just into the technical side, but into the human side as well, where the whole community is not just based somewhere central. Like, I mentioned I'm in New York City, and I think some projects evolve in just highly specific geographies, and we're hoping to be truly decentralized on the human side of things as well.
So how do you create? I know how you create decentralization on technology, but how do you create decentralization for everybody?
Yeah, and it's challenging. Of course, because I feel like we are, as humans, often just focused on the people immediately around us, and it makes sense. Because that's really, who we interact with the most, even with all this remote work. I feel like those in-person interactions are so important to driving that true community and decentralization. So taking that into mind, we've designed this proof of community initiative, which are these global meetups that happen all over the world. So really just getting there and being present and on the ground in these different countries has made a huge, huge difference. Like you have to physically travel there, visit the educational institutions, present at the different types of meetups, connect with local community leaders to really experience that true sort of decentralization on a human level. And we're just really starting to build it out more and more. We launched a small series here in New York City that's been really exciting. We had a backpacking India series with a team in India on the ground traveling to different universities and towns that really didn't have a lot of exposure, some of them to Web3, and some, were already sort of on the bandwagon. So it's interesting, and you tend to learn a lot more about your communities when you're just actually having an in-person conversation. And so that's been a really kind of key part of our overall community-driven effort.
It's kind of like imaginative traveler for crypto.
Yeah, exactly.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I backpacked across Southeast Asia and China before on sleeper trains. So that was cool. That would be good to have talk about crypto if it existed back then. It didn't.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that sounds like an amazing experience.
Yeah, yeah. So I like the concept of meetups. Um, so OCC, I read something on your site about OCC. I want to find out what that is all about and how the community is your CEO.
Absolutely. So I think that whole concept really boils down into understanding that the community and Shardeum and all of our internal efforts, everything should feel more or less one and the same, because you should never build and create just sort of in your own vacuum or bubble just because you think something might be cool. So we really ensure that the community is involved in key decisions, and what that actually looks like can be anything from these in-person conversations that I mentioned to surveys on our really large Discord community. Even with our recent, I guess now it's been a number of months, but time flies, our rebrand and new website, the community had opportunities to weigh in on specific colors, aspects of how we showcase the brand and all of those pieces, because it's really something that we want to create together. Another part of that is really sharing information openly with our community updates. And I know we and some other projects do this as well, where we try to be transparent around our timelines, why things may or may not be happening on time, and give people an opportunity to ask questions. And that does take place in those larger form updates. We also launched a series recently called the Lightning 3, which are just 3 quick community questions that we address with a member from the tech team. And that has been fun, because I know a lot of us also have very short attention spans. So I like catering to all different levels of attention and interest. That we also really focus in on the idea of shared ownership, and shared responsibility. So, that level of investment, if you're weighing in on a project, if you're shaping its future, you feel like you also have a piece of that. And whether it's from different ideas around incentives, but also just that kind of feeling of community and belonging drives a lot of the community as well, and those different core values that we mentioned. And that really, kind of all supports that community as the CEO idea. And really what that means is that there's not just one person making all of the decisions. And I know in traditional business, that's not necessarily the main role of the CEO, but that was what is meant to be encompassed by that community as the CEO idea. It's just that we're doing this together, we're making these decisions together, and we all benefit from the success of this type of project.
I like the idea. I like the concept. It's inclusive. Um, I'm on Telegram and I'm in some communities where I have investments.
Mhm.
And some communities where you might have the founders don't say anything. All right, and that drives people. It drives people nuts. They're like, "What's going on? Like, am I gonna lose my money? Like, what?" And you're including everybody in decisions. So, what do you see as the pros and cons of your approach as opposed to the siloed approach? What are the disadvantages of the siloed approach? What do you think?
Yeah, so I think with the siloed approach, there's some key disadvantages, and that includes, I think a lack of sense of ownership and kind of camaraderie if there's just a centralized decision-making structure. I do also think that you can really miss out on some different exciting ideas and perspectives because, again, if we want to be decentralized, but everyone making the decisions has a specific background or lives in a specific geography, you're probably missing out on a lot of what you could tap into in terms of evolving the project and making it something truly special and interesting. I think with the open community approach that it is still something you have to carefully manage, and it can take, I think, a little bit more time and energy as well. Because if with these different meetups and the proof of community, like I mentioned, these are people on the ground managing this. We are investing in those communities and supporting and trying to get educational materials out there and listen. And, that can also take a little bit more time. And it can take a lot more energy too, to make these types of decisions. And I think both with the siloed approach and with the community approach, you also just have to keep in mind, you can't necessarily make everyone happy. But if you design a decision-making process where you feel like at least the people who didn't agree are feeling heard to a degree, then you're moving in the right direction.
I like that concept. Like, I've been told before that if you're on Telegram and you're complaining about a project you're invested in, you're not being heard, right? And one of the promises of crypto blockchain is a voice for the voiceless.
Exactly.
How do you help the voiceless?
Yeah, it is a lot of having those opportunities to weigh in a simple way, through those surveys, through those meetups, actually getting to some of these more rural areas. It also means, because there is a pretty high at times barrier to entry, there is some design and thought when it comes to the technical side of a project like that. And it's not requiring someone to have significant computing power to engage or spin up their own node. And it's also, I think, in a way, really kind of going through those messages, understanding and designing specific educational materials that can help address some of those challenges. When I think of the voiceless, I think of these different communities that aren't being served by various Web3 projects. And I think a lot of that bridging that gap is educational materials and being clear and concise in your communications and really not making assumptions around where people are and how they want to learn things and testing a lot of those different methods. And I think that really, really can help bridge that at times, like a gap that sometimes feels really huge in this industry.
I'm trying to think back. 2017, I went to a conference in New York. It was called Blockchain for Social Impact,
Oh, yes.
sponsored by Microsoft, right? Um, Most of the people there built protocols, based on need, based on what they thought the clients might want. Um, but there's some of them were building protocols based on social impact purpose. You're building a protocol that's focused on inclusivity as the primary purpose, right? I'm assuming there's challenges there, right? What are some of the major challenges that you're facing?
Yes. In addition to, I think that education gap, because you're not being inclusive if you're just focusing on groups that already are aware of how things work and how to engage. So it's really challenges include, bridging that educational gap. I think a lot of people are also accustomed to the convenience of centralized control and power and find the not so great user experience a little daunting, which is very understandable, and very stressful at times. And then building decentralized and open source tech is really challenging for a lot of different enterprises, as well as it can undermine their strategies for, profit maximization and really kind of their established order of how things have been done. So I think that those are some primary challenges, but I do think that there's also a huge reputational challenge when it comes to building something that's truly inclusive, because there's a decent part of the population where I think, if I'm being super honest with myself, it's very put off by Web3 and crypto, and I frankly can't really blame them. And I think it's partially the media has at times spun a negative image, or the things that around Web3 that make mainstream media haven't always been the most positive, or have been horrifically not positive. And, the general perception too of, people yelling at each other on Twitter. It doesn't always appear like a community that people want to be a part of. So I think a huge sort of barrier there, and when you're thinking about building something more inclusive, is just getting out there as a collective of lots of interested, dynamic individuals in this space, so the greater perception doesn't default to a crypto stereotype that I think is maybe one of the loudest images out there at the moment, if you're not in this space. Because once you're in it, that there's just like lots of incredible people from all over the world that are also in it. But from the outside looking in, that's not always the case. I've gotten so many questions from my friends that are like, why are you doing that? Why are you working in this industry? It doesn't look like, I saw this or that in the news, or this or that on Twitter. And they're like, that doesn't sound very fun. I'm like, there's so much more to it,
I know,
Yeah.
and because we talked to a lot of people in this space, right?
Yes.
Um, I I want to talk about that reputational challenge, because it is a challenge, right? There's
Yes.
a lot of toxicity, right?
Yes.
How do we? I mean, I don't want to say cleanse the toxicity, but how do we change that general perception of people on the outside, and then how do we change some of the mindsets of the maximalism, you know, within the industry, so that everybody could be on that same path forward?
Yeah, I think with some of the toxicity, it's making some decisions as hopefully a majority in the Web3 space that certain things will not be tolerated. And this is an extremely dramatic example, but after a conference that I was a part of, I feel like a number of months ago, an article came out around a side event that I hadn't attended, that they were serving sushi off of people's bodies. That is not what we need to be making the news about that conference. There was a lot of interesting conversations. There was a lot around, the future of how Web3, or how investors look at Web3. But unfortunately, the most kind of wild, in a bad way, piece is what made some of these articles. So I think we can collectively decide, and this is a very dramatic example, like I said, like, hey, we don't, serve sushi off of people's bodies as an industry. We're a real company, we're a real project, we're a real industry, and we don't do things like this. So I think that can be helpful, because then maybe all that the locals in that area saw about the conference was this sushi incident, and that's really unfortunate. So we want to avoid things like that very, very much so. And with kind of the maximalist perspective, with some of the, you have the Bitcoin maxis, Ethereum, all of that, I think that they're always going to exist. And I do just think that whenever we can, as almost representatives of Web3 and speaking to other people, offer a more nuanced approach to what Web3 looks like, and redirecting some of the conversations, at least some of the ones I've had, to the technology, because that's the part I think is really interesting to me. If you get just wrapped up into only conversations around speculation, I mean, for some people that's great, but at least the friends and family that I've had conversations with and new contacts, they didn't even realize there was this whole element to what Web3 is trying to do in terms of building new things and what that looks like, and gaming. And it's not just watching prices go up and down. So I think that engaging in these broader conversations is really important for us as an industry.
I feel it's David versus Goliath, and Goliath in big tech firms
Yeah.
easily pay for news articles that will focus on the negativity, you know. Um, and that goes back into what you said about enterprises. You know, it's a challenge for enterprises to make some of their business open source, right? So how can we help them get there?
Yeah, like you said, it is a challenge. And I do think it is kind of showing up with this David and Goliath scenario, like you said. I think we just need to show up and be that much better when it comes to how we present ourselves, how we educate, how we forge partnerships and talk about things. And I think a lot of it is going to be getting to even those Web2 conferences, just because a lot of the theme of our conversation today has been the value of having in-person conversations too, when it comes to building trust, getting there and not trying to dazzle anyone with your Web3 jargon, but really trying to connect with folks in Web2 as well and educate around some of the benefits of Web3 and why you're excited about it. And I think that that would really help with some of these larger enterprise partnerships, because a lot of the folks that I'd connected with over the years on the enterprise side in the past, there's a healthy level of skepticism, but they're also curious, but the whole space can feel wildly overwhelming if someone's not willing to kind of have a seat and talk through some of the interesting aspects framed for the specific person you're speaking to. Like they need to understand the specific value for them rather than just what your project is doing in terms of like a list of features and facts, if that makes sense. I think reframing the conversation can be really important there.
I want to dive down that path because I've been saying it the whole time I've been in crypto is I see a lot of developers and companies building something, then saying, hey, this is what we built for you, instead of asking the people who are this is, hey, what do you need? And then building what they need, right? So how do we change the mindset within the crypto developers to go ahead in the Web2 and then find out what Web2 people need and then build that?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point, because just kind of throwing things out there without listening, they might be really cool things, but you have to have that kind of insight and buy-in. In addition to having those kind of conversations and having the data, I think you also need to be really connecting with those developers, because I think there's going to be a subset that just will always want to build cool things for the sake of cool things. That's great. Those aren't necessarily going to be the folks that are also the same group that are going to be building the things that are implemented by the enterprises. There's some overlap, but not always. I think it's kind of finding the group of developers that's willing to build something that's tailored to a need that has been identified and needs to be met. And like I said, those aren't necessarily two exclusive groups. There's overlap, but I think it's just important to understand too that there are going to be subsets that are always just like, no, I just want to build this random thing, and they can probably find a job doing that, and that's great too, but it's not necessarily the group that's going to be tailoring everything to solve these enterprise level problems.
That when I think of that group of people, you just mentioned that I think number one, NFTs, they were successful,
Mm-hmm.
and meme coins,
Yeah.
which in some ways are very successful. So how do we develop that culture so that everyone can embrace that meme culture, that NFT culture, that like how do we get there?
Yeah, I just don't know that everyone or even a majority of people will, as they're presented right now. And by that, I mean, when I think about NFTs and when I think a lot of people think about them now, it's the little pictures and it's the building not too far from where I'm based in Williamsburg that's just painted. We have the pudgy penguins, which are admittedly very adorable. We've got some Bored Apes up there, all of these. So I think that's people's perception of NFTs. I think for broader acceptance, and engagement with NFTs, we'll probably end up not calling them NFTs, but they'll be using the same underlying technology, and it will be what's powering like a rewards program, or what's powering, you being able to hold on to different items you collect in a video game, or, so it's functionally going to be the same thing in what it does and how it works, but it's not going to be packaged in the same way. So you can tell, I mean, I've been focused on all this marketing and branding stuff for too long now. And so for me, I do think it's kind of the framing and packaging when it comes to this aspect of the technology, and maybe the calling it NFTs and ship has sailed when it comes to the broader, population accepting it or not.
Got it. So it's important then to build strong Web3 communities, right?
Yes.
How do we build those stronger Web3 communities? What are the benefits to the greater blockchain industry in doing so? I think we already covered all that, but I want to find out what is any additional things that you think we must focus on.
Yeah, with building the strong communities and the benefits, it is a lot of the stuff I feel like we've touched on, but education, meeting people where they are in terms of their education, making sure you're welcoming a variety of generations based on what interests them when it comes to the technology. So what's going to be interesting for a student blockchain club might be a little bit different from like our parents and their level of what they would be interested in regards to technology. And it's okay, I think, if everyone doesn't understand everything, because it's more or less impossible. And also there's like a level of understanding and trust that's required. And then there's a level of understanding that's not required. Like I have a vague sense of how my car works, but I couldn't build one and I couldn't describe all of the internal mechanisms. And I think sometimes we focus a little too much on education at a granular level, like here's how you build an engine, which great for some people, but just isn't going to be resonating with a broader population. And that's not that kind of tailored resourcing that we are talking about. So education builds a stronger Web3 community, especially when you're thinking through the actual demographics and interests of your community, incorporating those different generations into your community and encouraging active participation, whether it's through just appreciating, different evangelists that you have in your community, whether it's contests down the line, whether it's building out a team of community managers that are the ultra engaged ones. There's a lot of things you can kind of do there, but that more or less sums it up. And the benefits of the community building really is kind of that foundation of trust and appreciation and camaraderie, which is really what I feel like a lot of Web3 projects are after.
I know how to go in my car, turn it on, and drive to lunch or dinner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's all it works for you and it does something for you. And that's enough to get into that car.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the fact that you brought up generations though. When I first got into crypto in 2017, I was right after I got laid off at AIG. Some of you probably maybe you have some friends who worked on Wall Street there. But I thought Bitcoin was a database. It's open source database. I didn't realize it was a war, a banking war, and I didn't realize it was a generational war, right?
Yeah.
And then I look at my listeners. I'm really good Gen X. I'm really good millennial. So good with Boomer. I'm not really good with the 17-year-olds. What's the way to be able to have the third generation reach like the Boomer generation and the I guess Zoomer generation be on the same page when it comes to technology and community?
Yeah, because I think at the heart, both generations understand community. And I feel it's just at a very like human level, people are driven towards being in various communities, but I think it's how you're presenting. And a lot of what I've found is helpful with kind of bringing in different groups of people is finding the right types of partners and something that they can recognize. So what's the thing that, the Gen Z kids, folks, young adults, I guess, at this point can recognize, and what resonates? Is it a specific artist? Is there a unique kind of problem that is really near and dear to the heart of that generation? And same with sort of the more Boomer generation as well. Like, what is sort of driving those individuals and what are they hoping to see solved? And I think it'd be interesting to figure out, like, I don't know if for Gen Z, it's the potential. I think there was much more of a boom when it came to some of the NFTs. I think some of the gaming, all of those important and exciting pieces, and figuring out like what about the technology makes each of these generations' lives a little bit easier, and honing in on that can be a really interesting way to sort of try to reach people where they are and start kind of that dialogue that sometimes we're missing out on.
I like that answer. I like meeting people where they are, and being inclusive and welcoming to all is a good start.
It's a great start. Can be easier said than done. I've seen so many just good intentions out there that, they just don't quite get anywhere. But I think the solid intentions and a game plan are the best possible start for bringing others into the space.
Yeah, sounds good. So I want to thank you very much for talking to me today. I enjoyed speaking with you. I have one last question, probably the easy one, and it's this: is how can people find out more information about you, about Shardeum, follow what you're up to, attend your meetups around the world? How can they do that?
Absolutely. So shardium.org is the best place to find information on Shardium. That's the hub for all of our social channels as well. And we'll have a lot of information there, as well as different events that we're attending. We'll be at Proof of Talk in Paris next month. So if anyone's attending, definitely reach out. For me, finding me on LinkedIn, send a message to Kelsey McGuire. And then I am semi-reluctantly on Twitter at Hey McGuire. But if you send a message there or tweet at me, I will try to get to it at some point. I am working on being a little more engaged there, but it's not my favorite channel.
Thank you very, very much for your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.